We are now going to be joined by area attorney Joshua Covert, who has been here on numerous occasions before. He is, I think, our resident activist attorney, I would call him. He's been involved with a lot of causes. You know him from discussions on medical marijuana and also on the child custody cases related to medical marijuana with the Green family. You know him as well. Let's see, what other cases have you been here on?
I was here on the Enbridge protesting
The Enbridge,
case.
My Cat 3, where I went out to the Mason courtroom and saw those women. In fact, I was just seeing posts from Lisa Leggio last night talking about how this is the anniversary of her, the birth of her grandchild, and that occurred last year while she was in jail, and how powerfully emotional it was for her during that period of time. So you've kept a lot of people out of doing hard time, and now you have another one that we're hoping. Introduce us to your client, and Nate, happy to meet you. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved.
Yeah, my client's Noah Saperstein. He was a
Noah.
recent graduate of Michigan State University who's been charged with violating one of Michigan State's ordinances, which is 1503, which makes it a crime to interfere or obstruct with the normal activities of a building. And Mr. Saperstein attended a Board of Trustees meeting and decided to speak up. And apparently that's a criminal offense.
What did you do, Noah, that was so outrageous? You went up to the microphone during public comment, or?
No, there's actually no, actual public comment.
Yeah.
You have to reserve time 48 hours prior to it. But when they announced President Simon's raise, it was going from $520,000 a year to $750,000 a year. I asked a question. There wasn't time for questioning. I stood up. I asked, if the university hires adjunct and associate faculty as a means to cut costs, why don't we hire an adjunct and associate president to cut costs?
Oh, you were terribly rude. That's what they...
Last I knew, rude was not illegal.
Yeah.
This is, Bonnie, you know I'm working on something that takes place in 1965 where there was an incredible free speech case on this campus. And, or not this campus, excuse
not
me.
LCC,
I forgot
MSU
where
campus.
on the MSU campus. And at the time, the president of the university was worried about it becoming the next Berkeley free speech movement. And to what you did is so non-egregious. I mean, come on. I mean, you weren't really disrupting anybody, getting in their way, pushing, shoving, sitting down. You just asked a question.
I was actually standing, but yeah, I wasn't getting in the way. When I was asked to leave, I did leave.
You complied with everything they asked you to do, but it was just asking a question, in essence, out of turn. You didn't raise your hand, and wait to get called on. Is that what the? But there really is no provision for any kind of public comment on something like that, from what I understand.
Yeah, unless you reserve time 48 hours beforehand.
And would you have known that that was going to be? I mean, what did you go there originally? Did you know that this was the issue you cared about?
No, I was involved in some of the organizing against George Will coming to speak at campus and being paid $47,500, especially at the time when the university has a extremely insufficient amount of sexual assault counselors. George Will was controversial because he recently published an article with what people sometimes call taking the stance of being a rape apologist.
It was definitely a controversial article.
Yeah, extremely.
And I don't think when he was invited that article had come out yet, but it certainly added to the problems. And Michigan State is under investigation for Title IX offenses related to its handling of sexual assault. It's one of the universities nationwide that's been called to task on this, so that's obviously an important issue. Very hot issue on campus. So that was the issue that you showed up for.
Yeah, some students had reserved time to speak about this issue, so I went there to support them. And then, yeah, we heard the announcement about President Simon getting over a 40% raise, while tuition went up last year despite increase in state funding. Teaching assistants, adjunct faculty are, highly underpaid and struggle to get raises every year. But yet, President Simon can easily get over a 40% raise.
Yeah, that's a...
Doesn't that is it? What do they call that? It's not a law, clearly. It's what do they call that at a university level?
An ordinance, you mean?
Yeah.
It was an ordinance.
They have ordinances. They have the power to create an ordinance.
Yep.
So isn't that kind of like overly vague?
That's what I've been thinking about. There is a statute right below that, 1505, which discusses basically the same thing, but instead of interfering with a building, it's interfering with a person. And that statute was declared unconstitutional. I do plan on challenging 1503 on constitutional basis.
So can you imagine your constitutional rights going up against a building?
And I don't think you were interfering with the building anyhow. That they couldn't charge you for interfering with any of the people because that had already been found unconstitutional. So they simply reached into sort of the grab bag and tried to find one that might fit. Is the idea, Joshua? I mean, I'm really concerned about this because it seems we are losing our right to protest or ask questions or do anything nowadays. I'm really worried about free speech issues. I taught a free freshman seminar for many years on free speech, and I'm seeing the opportunities and the venues for free speech just being shut off. I was one of the people who was a plaintiff in the ACLU case today that was thrown out of court, dismissed, it's gone. It was about when we were shut out of the Capitol during the protests for right to work. And I was there with my press pass, citizen journalist trying to get in, couldn't get in. And that's the first time the Capitol's only closed twice in its whole history, from what I understand. And it's just this idea that they can shut off debate. That seems to me to be a valid area of discussion. It should be open for participation. It's the kind of open and transparent discussions that we should be happening.
Especially at a university.
Yeah.
I mean, think about this.
How did the discussion on the George Will case go? Did those students, they didn't have a problem because they were on the schedule?
Yeah, they didn't have a problem, but prior to this, there was already over 70,000 petition signatures turned into the university to stop George Will from coming. There was tons of press about it. Departments, organizations, unions associated with the university all released statements condemning the university's decision. Both undergraduate and graduate student government released similar statements.
I'm a free speech absolutist, so I wanted him to speak. I think we should hear from all sides.
I just don't think we should have paid him $47,000.
I just think that's the part that really
at graduation.
Right.
That's my problem.
Well, especially when
yeah.
Michael Moore will come for free.
And I don't think it should come out of university pockets to pay, $7,000.
But then also a big issue at play is the fact that, the comments he made a lot of students feel unsafe. So now you're talking about, graduates not feeling safe at their own graduation.
That's an argument I'm less fond of. There are plenty of free speech arguments that,
That
make
sounds like
people
he's
feel
interfering with the
uncomfortable. Feeling uncomfortable is part of being a grown-up, and
Well-
even when you're a victim. And I'm a victim of domestic violence. I'm a victim of violence, so I can speak too. But at a certain point, I think free speech has to trump that. But you and I have a right to disagree about that,
Right.
and that's one of those open conversations we should
One of the
have.
questions I've got, I didn't know you had to reserve there's usually a time almost in any public body where you can speak on the issues. They can limit your time, they can do all kinds of things, but they know who's going to come to speak before they have the open meeting, right? I haven't been following that open
That's been
meeting
in
law.
place a long time.
Where you have to reserve. They don't do that at any city councils.
No, but they do at the Board of
How
Trustees.
can they get away with that?
That's a very good question.
It is.
I have problems with that as well because you don't know what's necessarily going to be said at the meeting.
Exactly.
You
That's
don't
what I
know
mean.
if you have a comment until you sit through the meeting. So how are you supposed to know in 48 hours in advance? To me, it just doesn't make sense.
What are you facing? What consequences as a result?
Test in some cases, so they can get you and keep you from speaking out.
You see, that was basically the essence of the Paul Sheff case in '65, who we took to federal district court, and then MSU negotiated very quickly. But it broke up the entire state news. The state news staff, half of it quit because the administration said they couldn't publish side by side the two cases, sides of the arguments. It's really messy, but that goes back a long time. But free speech on a university is it's the place it should be protected.
Right. I mean, that's the place where you really want an open dialogue. And it seems to me that the trustees meeting is, it's hard enough to get anybody to show up. I mean, the hard problem, I think, is to get any level of civic engagement. So when you have students or recent grads who care enough to show up at the meetings, there should be a venue for them to
I don't
speak.
think they
Yeah.
want people to show up.
They
don't.
clearly don't. They're scheduled typically about 3 of them a semester. There's usually one during finals week. They're typically Friday mornings at 9:30 a.m. So you think about students who are in classes then, commuting students who might not be on campus then, a lot of staff, faculty, teaching assistants who are working then. Anybody who's researching is usually busy at that time. So it's really like intentionally inconvenient. And I believe last year at University of Michigan, there were actually like court cases about how transparent the Board of Trustees meetings truly, or Board of Regents meetings truly were over there. Because if you've ever gone to any of these meetings, it's very clear that all decisions have already been made.
Yep.
You know, they have a formal vote, but it's always unanimous. No one objects. There's no cross debate. It's purely like updating the general public on decisions they've already made.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7. We're talking with attorney Joshua Covert and his client Noah Saperstein about trying to open up open meetings and how it is that we actually get a dialogue going about them. One of the challenges is if you just show up, as I did. I remember I came with my video camera at the time when they were talking about eliminating certain programs. Very contentious meeting. I took a lot of video, and there were a lot of the students on campus had no idea that those meetings were going on, and they really had strong feelings about which departments were potentially on the block and which weren't, but it wasn't part of the dialogue. So it's a real challenge to be able to get that kind of conversation going at the university. The university is undergoing dramatic changes, both here at LCC, at MSU. Higher ed is really undergoing massive changes in terms of how it's being funded, who's teaching the classes, where the money is going to. We need more open discussion on that.
Yeah, I mean, going off of that right now, a student organization is FOIAing the university to find out why they have, I think it's $70,000 being invested from the Koch brothers, and what that money is going towards, because there have been other instances where Koch brother money comes with, you know, them having a say in economics hirings, you know, which economic professors they're teaching, or even, you know, content for courses and things like that.
Those are questions that a lot of people have nowadays. I remember when Yale University turned down a $200,000 grant for an LGBT studies department from the Bass family because the Bass family wanted to dictate who would be the first director. And they said, no, you don't have that right. That's academic freedom. But as universities become more strapped for money, we find some of those questions that are under pressure to find resources.
Well, a lot of universities, like especially Big Ten universities, aren't actually strapped for cash.
If you look at their endowment.
Yeah, I mean, they have, you know, tuition goes up every year. We just saw state funding increase in Michigan. And then they have a lot of, like, very, you know, questionable investments that they get. And I know, like, U of M in particular, they have these things called gray books. It's, you know, files that they release to, like, investors, people who are trying to put money into the university with the sole purpose of getting profit. And these books will talk about, like, tuition's gone up for X amount of years, you know, successfully. We still have our largest incoming freshman class year after year. We've had X amount of protests, but no real change has come from it. You know, like, you can feel free to put money into this institution, and you will get a profit.
I've got a question. You mentioned academic freedom. In previous years and times and places, the professors came forward and helped defend this freedom of speech. Are they doing that anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I know I've, like, had instances before. One time I was working with Peckham United. They were the union at Peckham Vocational Industries, and I was for a Michigan State project doing, like, a presentation on Peckham, and my intent was to expose, you know, what was happening to the workers that were there. One faculty member was upset. There was talk of removing me from the program, and another faculty member stepped up and, you know, said, this is academic freedom. Just because, you know, you don't like what you're hearing doesn't mean that he can't give this presentation.
I don't think very many people know about your case. It was not covered anywhere, was it, that I know of?
There was very minimal press coverage of it. Very little, or I don't think there were any articles that addressed me by name, but it was predominantly about, you know, this was a Board of Trustees meeting. By the way, this incident happened.
Somebody was removed, and that was about all that was said. Was it in the student newspaper at all?
I do not believe so, but potentially.
What was your major? What are you hoping to do? What is your...
My major was history education.
Oh, interesting.
So the thought was middle school, high school history. And yeah.
Conviction and the time in jail would not exactly be a good career move at this point, yes, I would think.
I mean, that's never like a great career move.
Yeah.
However, I've been involved with, you know, campus organizing and social justice for a few years. During my time in, you know, Michigan State's College of Education, I talked to many instructors and faculty members about, you know, potential charges and how that could, impact my potential hiring as a student. And I was consistently reassured that, anything related to civil disobedience and social justice wouldn't be that large of an impediment. But that being said, I'm an uncertified, potential teacher, so it's hard enough to find a job.
Did you happen to see John Lewis when he was on campus?
No.
Yeah, I mean, he arrested 61 times.
And he seems to be doing okay.
He did okay. The man that introduced him, I think his name is Bill Anderson, he's a DO, he'd been arrested 21 times.
Uh-huh.
But it's for civil rights movement, and it is a different time now.
That's what worries me.
It is a very
There was an
different time.
era in which those were almost a badge of honor, and they were a door opener in some cases because it meant you had somebody who was thoughtful, somebody who was committed and dedicated. But nowadays it just seems that when you have 200 and 300 applicants for a job, almost, such small things mean you go to the bottom of the pile. That's the challenge. I mean, isn't it, Joshua? What should people think about civil disobedience in this era? What's doable?
That's a good question. It depends a lot on where you are and what you're speaking out against, I think.
Yeah.
And so that's a tough question to answer.
It does make a big difference, doesn't it? I mean, what the topic is and what
Certainly.
venue you choose. Do we see as you're at the forefront of hearing about a lot of these cases. You keep track of them. Are we seeing an upsurge in activism on different issues?
I would say certainly, yeah, especially even I would say the last year or so even. There's been a lot of movement with the police misconduct, and I think that's been a big upswing, and so I think we see it a lot more.
So no, you were allowed to leave, but then at some point they arrested you.
Correct.
When did that happen?
In the hallway.
In the hallway, so they had already called and somebody had sort of alerted that you were coming out.
I believe they were officers at the Board of Trustees meetings. They were not in uniform.
Correct.
They were wearing khakis and blazers. I believe that's who asked Noah to leave.
So
And nobody identified themselves as an officer
right.
until it was time to arrest Mr.
So who do you think
Saperstein.
made that decision to arrest you? I mean, who said, get him? Somebody did. It's interesting.
We're trying to find that out.
Was it on
I
a cell
like-
phone? Is there a record?
Freedom
I
of
mean,
Information
there
Act is a
text?
beautiful thing.
It's probably a text. There's probably a text. I mean, you did probably the least disruptive thing you could do.
Right. Right.
And you didn't go into that with any kind of malice. I mean, did you know that you could be arrested for doing that?
I did not think that my specific actions were going to lead to an arrest,
I wouldn't
and I
have
had
either.
no intent of being arrested when I woke up that morning.
Yeah, I wouldn't have.
Yeah,
I
you didn't go
definitely-
there trying to provoke them into an arrest.
I mean, I could see myself doing that. That's what's kind of scary about it.
That's the problem with the vague statute like that, is that with a statute that vague, pretty much anything you do on campus could be construed as a crime.
Let me give you an alternative situation where there was no arrest, which I found was kind of amusing. David Horowitz came to campus, and he's a noted conservative speaker, and he was brought in by some of the college conservative groups. And I went up and asked him in advance. I had my video camera with me, and I said, "Where will you be standing? I'd like to get some good video." And he said, "Well," and I said, "Could we put up the screen because it would interfere, that kind of thing." So we got that all arranged. And then when it was Q&A time, I was asking him a question, and he got agitated that he was being videoed. He just didn't like me asking the questions I was asking. So he came over, assaulted me, grabbed my camera, and I have a bad arm, so I have to be very careful about how my arm is treated, and it's a $3,000 camera that I care about. And so he tries to grab my camera from me because he's going to take out, I think he thinks there's film in it. He would never found the film. And because they were concerned about him being a provocative character, there were already 2 police officers in the room in uniform. None of them did a thing. I'm being assaulted, and they just kind of let it happen. So I find it ironic that you would actually be arrested, because under that circumstance, what he did to me should have been the subject of an arrest. You can't really just come over and grab a person's camera and try to wrest it away from them.
If I was on that board of trustees, which could never happen, I'd be embarrassed that this happened.
Yeah. I mean, I'm surprised the charges haven't been
I'd be ashamed that I
dropped.
served on a board of trustees that allowed this to happen.
Do you think the charges are just going to get dropped? Has the prosecutor decided to go forward with this?
At this point, they're going forward with this.
And do you think, have you had any sense of why that would be? Don't they think that's something that should just be?
I'm not sure at this point. We're still kind of trying to figure that out.
Now, what was the date that this occurred? How long ago? How many weeks?
I think it was somewhere around the first week of December.
Enough time to think it over. and decide that this would not be something they would want to do. So what are you still living in this community? Do you have to come back for these proceedings?
Yeah, I'm currently living in Lansing.
Thank goodness, you don't have to drive in 50 miles just to do this. You're going to be going, when is the next trustees meeting?
The next trustees meeting, I believe, is April 17th. We just had one on February 6th.
Did you go to that one?
No,
No.
I did not.
It'd be interesting to have a group. How many people can go to a meeting? They probably control the number of people who can be in the audience, don't they?
The only control is the like occupancy of the space. I intentionally looked at the sign at last time I was there to remember, but I can't remember what the number is. But in the past, they've allowed people to sit on the ground
Yes.
at them. But then I've also heard cases of them, closing the doors and, forcing people out.
When I was there at the time when that was a hot item, they were rotating people in and out because of the fire code. So they would let people sit on the floor and attend. So they were able to cram quite a few people into the room. Usually over attendance is not their problem. It's
Yeah.
usually that you could do bowling there. One of the things I think that was so that they were most upset about with some of the videos that I did was it just showed the level of inattention on the part of a lot of the trustees. One of the things that I thought was surprising was that when people went to the microphone to talk passionately about why a particular program should be saved, you looked at the trustees and they were checking their mail on their cell phones and chatting with each other, and I really felt that was surprising. That surprised me.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen trustees get up and walk away during the public comment time.
Yeah.
So I know whenever we have folks, go up and speak, we're always excited if, they're listening. And when they're at their phones, we shrug it off. We're like, typical, clearly they don't respect us as students. And, we know that sometimes they do get up and walk away.
What are the big issues on campus right now?
A big issue I would definitely say is sexual assault and the university's complacency with that. I know students are also organizing to have more sustainable seafood in the cafeterias. Students are trying to get the university to stop selling JanSport products on campus because of their labor practices overseas. Students are trying to get...
There was a pretty active sweatshop movement here for quite a while on campus.
Yep,
Very
we had
active.
Students for Economic Justice, which was infiltrated by the police in the early 2000s. That was a chapter of United Students Against Sweatshops. They disbanded after the police infiltration and then recently reorganized, I think, last year.
Interesting era. Joshua's going to be kept busy with all of his pro bono work, trying to keep people out of that Ingham County jail. I think they're going to put a nice gold plaque on some of the cells out there for you, Joshua. Thank you for listening to Lansing Online News Radio with Bonnie Bucqueroux and Bill Castanier, and thanks to our guests Joshua Covert and Noah Saperstein, and also to Michael McCallum, the star of Streetcar Named Desire coming up, and to Valerie Marvin with the upcoming events for the Historical Society of Greater Lansing. Tune in next Monday night for Lansing Online News Radio. This is